Welcome back. Congressman Devin Nunes was among the first lawmakers to question the Russia collusion hoax as then chairman of the House Intel Committee, telling us right here on this program 3 years ago that the FBI engaged in a coup to take down a sitting president. This week, he joined me on Mornings with Maria over on Fox Business with some breaking news on the Steele Dossier. Watch.
Where we now see direct links between the Brookings Institute leadership and the creation, possibly, of the Steele Dossier and the dissemination of the Steele Dossier. I think they have real questions that need to be answered here about what on earth was the president of Brookings doing, texting back and forth to Steele. Why was he accepting the dossier?
Joining me right now with an update is Congressman Devin Nunes. He is the ranking member of the House Intel Committee. Congressman, it is always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here. We have this breaking news this morning as the subsource of the dossier, Igor Danchenko, has been unmasked. Tell me about this subsource and his ties to Brookings.
Well, thank you, Maria. Thanks for having me on. You may remember a couple months ago I was on your show and I talked about that we were really looking at 3 Russians. And as Senator Graham said at the beginning of the show, it ends up that we actually weren't looking for the third one was actually not a Russian at all. He actually sounds like he lives here in America. And, you know, the FBI led Congress to believe that, and the media led Congress to believe, and they led the American public to believe that somehow Steele had this really super secret source that nobody could know about. Well, it ends up that he used to work for the Brookings Institute. It looks like there were a lot of connections to the Brookings Institute, which for those of your viewers who don't know what this is like the prominent left-wing think tank here in our nation's capital. So we're investigating now and have been. We had these links earlier on. People may remember the president of Brookings back in 2016. We know that he had given the dossier to a few people. We had that through testimony. You also may remember that the State Department was involved, and there were additional dossiers that weren't the Steele dossiers, except that they mirrored the Steele dossiers. And we think there's a connection between the president of Brookings and those dossiers that were given to the State Department that mirrored the Steele dossiers, which, look, all of this, what does this mean? This was the Clinton campaign's dossiers. It was the dirt. It was a phony story that they sold not only to the American people, but they sold it and corrupted our FBI, where it appears like these dirty cops were more than willing to take this information and present it to the FISA court. So here's the final point on Brookings. So here's the final point. So we've now expanded our investigation, full-blown investigation into the Brookings Institute, and it really centers on 2 issues. One is the IRS. This is a tax-exempt organization. They're supposed to stay out of politics. They clearly have not done that. They've obstructed our investigation with propaganda for the last 4 years. It's well known that they've attacked our investigation for 4 years through this kind of phony legal group of fact checkers that they set up. So we need to look at see if they have been involved in politics. Secondly, secondly, they also take foreign money from foreign countries and foreign governments. And we need to know what foreign governments were involved in this, because were they acting on behalf of a foreign power? Everybody's questioned, for all this time, when it was, the Trump campaign and Republicans were involved with Russians. Well, who was the Brookings Institute? Who are their foreign donors? And are they doing all of this not just to help the Democratic Party, but also any foreign government?
Well, what this all tells me, including the subsource revealed, is that there was indeed collusion in this country, but it was collusion with Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, and it also just goes to show you that this was some sick fantasy that was made up by the Clinton campaign and their operatives. And think of this. You had people in the media. Remember this whole thing about prostitutes and P-tapes in Moscow? These fools were running around all over Europe in Moscow, the leading institutions, these supposed leading reporters. But, nobody calls them out on that. And the whole thing was like some sick fantasy made up by the Clinton campaign.
Well, many of them actually got Pulitzer Prizes for their reporting. I want to ask you about Robert Mueller, because these items that were declassified clearly indicate that the FBI knew that the dossier was fake, that the dossier was hearsay and bar talk. How come Mueller didn't unearth these things? I mean, let's watch Robert Mueller when he testified in front of Congress to listen to what he said about things like Fusion GPS. Roll the clip.
When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, let me just help you. It was. It's not a trick question. Right? It was Fusion GPS.
I'm not familiar with it. You have unearthed all of these things, Lindsey Graham declassifying the evidence that the FBI knew the dossier was garbage, and he had no recollection? I don't understand. Where was Mueller in all of this, Congressman?
Well, look, I think the question is does Mueller know where Mueller is? Okay, this was somebody who was put up as an avatar to give credibility to this investigation that was phony from the beginning. Okay, so I'm not talking about just in 2016. I'm talking about the day that Mueller walks in the door. I'm not sure he knows what the hell's going on. And clearly, a couple of years later, when he testifies before Congress, to not know who Fusion GPS is was astounding. And you know, look, the Democratic Party, it's very odd for a party that seems to be, against white people and always talking about racism. They sure like to prop up these avatar old white dudes. They have one run for president right now who's hiding in his basement who won't answer questions. What was his involvement? Their presidential candidate, supposedly went after and was the one who concocted this idea to use the Logan Act to investigate the Trump campaign and the incoming president, by the way.
Well, you've made 14 criminal referrals with a 15th pending. We are waiting on John Durham to investigate that. We're going to hear more from John Durham soon, I assume. Let me move on real quick about the technology CEOs testifying, not in front of your committee, but they're going to be testifying this week in the House, in front of the Judiciary Committee. You have said conservative censorship is the most important issue ahead of the 2020 election. What do you want to hear from people like the head of Twitter, the head of Google, et cetera, when they testify this week?
Well, look, Congress gave these guys special powers so that they could create companies so that people could go and use the internet. It was supposed to be an open public square. Think of it as a public square where everyone, as long as they're following the law, they can go out there and state their case and participate in that public square. What's happened here is that Facebook and Google and Twitter are partisan hacks for the Democratic Party and the left. And so what's happening is, think of that, go back to that public square example, they're deciding who gets to go into the public square. So the good thing will be is that we're actually going to have the Parler CEO who's going to testify, and you can follow me at Parler, at Devin Nunes at Parler, and he's been on your show, Maria. They have that town square, and they're letting all Americans go there and express their views.
We got a job. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Devin Nunes. We'll be right back.